Hi, everyone. I'm Kat Oriel with Forbes Breaking News. Today, I'm here with Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. Senator, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So, you're the chair of the Senate Commerce's Aviation Safety Subcommittee. So, what was your reaction to the really scary Alaska Airlines door blowout that happened just last week?
Well, as a commercial pilot myself, I was thinking about that air crew, the cabin crew, and the passenger safety and what those pilots did and then what the crew members did to get that aircraft on the ground safely. And I'm glad that we had no fatalities. And now the key thing is to look at what we need to do to safeguard the safety of the flying public. And we're going to be getting all the data. I spoke with NTSB Chairwoman Hamandi just a couple hours ago. They've sent the door plug in for analysis in their labs. We're going to get data from FAA and look at exactly what failed. Was it missing bolts, broken bolts, loose bolts? What is it? Look at the other aircraft that are in the fleets of various airlines that have all been grounded now, and the inspections are happening. And so we need to know whether this was a single incident in this one aircraft or whether this is an issue with all of this type of aircraft that's out there. And so I'm just going to wait until we get all the data to figure out what we do next.
And once the investigation is complete, you believe that there are legislative solutions to this kind of event?
Well, there are several things that can be done. Certainly, the FAA can do some of this on their own, but we can also, as Congress, direct them to do some of this. Everything from the inspection protocols for how things are inspected to looking at how we certify new aircraft. The 737 MAX has had incidents in the past, and we've reformed some of the ways of the certification of that aircraft. We may need to take another look at it. We may need to look at some of the processes in terms of how often we inspect this particular part on an aircraft, for example, to make sure that we detect any issues that might be coming up. But again, we're not going to know unless we figure out whether this was just a one problem with one airplane or whether this is all of the aircraft of this type.
Well, you've been a big advocate for making sure emergency evacuation standards are up to par. And I did also want to briefly touch on another incident that happened recently, this time outside of the US, the Japan Airlines jet that was engulfed in flames, yet all passengers were miraculously managed to evacuate in 18 minutes. So what do you think the US can learn from that experience?
Well, what we can learn is that it was not a miracle. It was good training and preparation by Japan Airlines, and kudos to them. I've often said, and you've heard me say this, Kat, that aviation regulations are written in blood. Japan Airlines was able to evacuate that aircraft and get everybody off safely because aviation regulations are written in blood, and they had lost an entire aircraft of passengers during an evacuation process a couple of decades earlier where everybody perished because they were not able to evacuate the aircraft. And when they learned from that, they did quite a few things in terms of their culture within the airlines, how they train their cabin crews. They did something as simple as making sure that there are bullhorns on the flight as backup communication equipment for the air crews. That's not part of what we have on American Airlines. And even on the Alaska Airlines incident where the door plug fell out, one of the problems that is coming up right now is they said that the cabin crews couldn't talk to each other, and they couldn't talk to the pilots, they couldn't talk to the passengers because it was so noisy. Had they had bullhorns on board as standard equipment, they would have been able to better speak with one another. And so what we need to do here in the US is look at our evacuation standards, which have not been updated since the 1960s. Congress did direct FAA to do a simulation, which they did a couple years ago. And they said they were able to evacuate to the 1960 standard of 90 seconds, but they only put 60 people on the aircraft, no carry-on baggage, nobody under the age of 18, and nobody over the age of 60, and nobody with a disability. Obviously, that's not real-world flying conditions today. It may have been in the 60s, but it's certainly not today. And we need to know exactly how long it's going to take so that the cabin crew knows what they have to do to get people off. And so that also, Kat, the emergency personnel, all those firefighters and the fire trucks rushing towards the aircraft to help evacuate people, if they think that the aircraft is evacuated in 90 seconds, they're going to be less worried about, oh, it's been more than 90 seconds. We know that everybody's off the airplane, instead of, oh, you know what? It's only been 90 seconds. It takes at least 5 minutes. We better make sure that we go after all the passengers that might still be on the aircraft. So it's just a safety protocol that's going to help both the cabin crew, but also the emergency personnel get those passengers off as quickly as possible.
And about a year ago, you joined my colleague Brittany Lewis to talk about this and your bill, the Emergency Vacating of Aircraft Cabin Act, and the FAA's 90-second standard, which you've already touched on. Can you outline your bill again for us? And has any progress been made in the year since we touched base with you?
Yeah, so it is in the FAA reauthorization bill that hopefully we're going to pass within the next couple of months here. I've taken the components of my Evac Act, which basically says the FAA will be required to fully establish an emergency evacuation standard that takes real life conditions into account. So I included in that, they must simulate carry-on bags, they must simulate children, car seats, seniors, passengers with disabilities, passengers who don't speak English, as part of their evacuation standard. So we're going to direct the FAA to do that and develop new standards.
And I'm curious how the Biden administration has been as a partner in all of these topics that we've been talking about. Has the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, worked with you on any of this?
He has, and most importantly, the new FAA administrator. This was something I spoke with Administrator Whitaker, who was just confirmed in his nomination and confirmation process. I had extensive conversations with him and said, you need to do this. This is how you're going to get my support for your nomination and confirmation as FAA administrator. And he's very supportive of this process.
And so beyond transportation safety and accessibility, what other legislative priorities can we expect from you this year?
Well, within the FAA reauthorization bill, you should know this also ties into the Japan airline incident, is having ground radar. So we have radar that looks at aircraft in the air, but not all of our airports have radar on the ground that will help us with these collisions. So like happened with Japan Airlines, they had two aircraft collide with one another. That's how the fire started. And so in the FAA reauthorization bill, there is money for the implementation of ground radar at all of our commercial airports, our large airports. There's also money for training of air traffic controllers, training of more pilots, training of more maintenance equipment and maintenance personnel. So we have a lot of things in this FAA reauthorization bill that is going to make flying safer for the American people.
And I guess my final question for you is that some people might see these recent events and be like, I'm terrified of flying. Flying's already a scary event. What do you have to say to them where, how can you reassure Americans that flying truly is safe?
Well, that, the number of instances of injuries from flying is far less than getting in your car and driving down to the grocery store or driving to work. But know that the regulations are some of the strongest and most stringent in the world, and that I certainly am keeping an eye on it. And I fly on a 737 MAX all the time. It's actually the standard aircraft that flies between Chicago and Washington, D.C. And I'll make darn sure that we keep flying as safe as possible. And we do have fixes in place for all of this.
Thank you so much for your time today, Senator.
Thank you.